Let's do another extract from Seminars and Shenanigans, my new release. I'm starting from chapter 5 and I'm going to play the parts of both Gary, of course, and Harriet. Some of you know Harriet. She's a nutcase. She's a great character. My mood was a bit solemn at work the next day, and I could sense Harriet's enthusiasm at dying to ask me what my problem was. She did quite a lot of typing for me these days, and even though I was grateful to her, she seemed to think it gave her an excuse to badger me on my private life. Considering she'd been caught more than once with her knickers around her ankles, screamed hypocrite in my view. But I had another letter that needed doing, and so I swallowed my pride and went to see her just before lunch. "Hi, Gary, how's it going?" she asked, taking the A4 sheet off me, containing my badly written drafted letter to Chloe Barber. "Tickety-boo," I replied, smiling and hoping she would turn her attention to the job I was giving her to do. "Only you don't seem yourself. You've been a bit off the last few days. You can talk to me if you need someone to listen." "Thanks, Harriet, I appreciate that. Do you want to go to Jack's for lunch and we can have a chat?" Too keen. Plus, Jack's was somewhere I tended to avoid after the trouble I'd had with Janice, who almost stole my heart and nearly ruined my wedding day. Mind you, looking back in hindsight, it might not have been a bad thing if she had ruined my wedding. I've brought some sarnies in. There was a bag of crisps and an out-of-date pork pie from Alfie's fridge in my briefcase. "Oh, right, well, how about to pop to your office when I've typed this up and we can have a coffee and a natter?" It was obvious she wasn't going to give up, so I decided to throw the towel in. "Yeah, OK, it needs posting first class today, so if you can make it a priority, please." "I'll be 10 minutes. She would too. It didn't take Harriet long to type a letter, and she turned her back on me and got to work before I'd even opened the door to leave. I meandered back to the office, acknowledging a few highs and all rights on my way. The students were a decent bunch on the whole, and seemed to respect me, with a few exceptions, of course. But I blended in with college life from day one, and even though I'd had days when I'd have much preferred to be lying on a beach in Greece, it was a good job to have and brought in a relatively good wage. Though I suspected a substantial amount of that might now go towards Alice's maintenance and Lisa's alimony, or whatever shit a solicitor would come up with. True to her word, Harriet knocked on my door at 12:05, just 10 minutes after I'd taken the letter to be typed. I told her to come in and sit down, and she put 2 cups of steaming coffee on the desk. "I've PP'd the letter and put a first-class stamp on it. I'll post it this afternoon." She sat down and picked up her cup. "So what's happening that's made you so down in the dumps?" Not backward in coming forward, Harriet stared straight at me and waited for my answer with bated breath. I'd worked with her for several years now and trusted her. We got on well, and although I'd never looked at her as a potential notch, especially after her shenanigans with Joe Mint, my predecessor, she was definitely a MILF. She had a pair of black trousers on today and a white blouse and buttoned a little bit too much for work, and I couldn't help but glance at the bit of cleavage on show. I could have sworn it hadn't been there earlier when I'd gone into her office with the letter. I think she caught me looking as she suddenly started fiddling with the chain around her neck. "It's confidential, so I'd appreciate you keeping it to yourself," I pointed out, not feeling too hopeful. She put her cup back on the desk and nodded. "Gary, you don't need to say that. You know whatever you tell me won't go any further. We've worked with each other long enough now to be able to trust each other." "You're right, we have, but I don't want any rumours getting around the college. It concerns Lisa, you see." Harriet knew Lisa, of course, as they'd worked together when she was employed as a tutor. "I thought as much," was her answer. "You know my thoughts on Lisa, so I won't beat about the bush. Has she been seeing someone else?" I stared at her. "No, God no. Well, I thought it would make things easier if she had been, but I was quite sure she hadn't." "Why'd you say that?" "Well, I wouldn't put it past her. She always was a tart." "Blimey, Harriet, don't hold back, will you? Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but you can't deny it." She was right, I couldn't, but as I was no better, I couldn't exactly say much. "Did you know she gave Peter Smith a blowjob behind the kitchen bins, not long before you two got together?" I had to put my cup down for fear of spilling coffee down my legs. Peter Smith was a really nice guy, and I'd had no idea him and Lisa had been a nicem. You're making that up, I said, screwing my face up whilst Harriet shook her head. Straight up. It was a bit before you took Joe's job. One of the students caught them and told Joe. Then he told me. Kitchen bins, though? Nah, Lisa's too classy to do that. What, give someone a blowjob? Harriet laughed and swigged the rest of her coffee. I'm sorry, Gary, but I think there's probably a lot about Lisa you don't know. She might have been faithful to you, but she had a terrible reputation when she worked here. You only need to ask the male population at this college. I bet she's been through most of them. That's slander, that is. You're talking about my wife here, and I don't think you should say any more. I really wasn't comfortable hearing what Lisa used to get up to before we got together, even though I did know her reputation wasn't particularly good. Well, I'll shut up then, but you know it's true. I never did like hearing home truths. So, do you want to tell me what's happened between you two? We've drifted apart. Harriet leant her elbows on the desk and shuffled her cleavage towards me. That's a shame, Gary. Maybe your daughter has changed her. That happens a lot. Having a couple of kids herself, I suspected she was speaking from experience, and especially after all the flings she'd had over the years. My marriage fell apart after my affair with Joe became common knowledge. We tried to patch things up, but he lost interest in me and started shagging around, so we got divorced. She fiddled with her chain again. But, she added, winking at me, we move on and get through it. My kids have flown the nest now, and I'm always up for enjoying myself. Is she coming on to me? I thought, trying hard to tear my eyes away from her ample chest. Lisa hasn't been seeing someone else, but she has been lying to me. I found out last night that she's been trying for another baby and didn't bother to tell me. Harriet threw her hands to her cheeks. You mean she's been going to a sperm bank? A sperm bank? I queried, my eyebrows knitting together. You know, one of those places where women can get injected with sperm, get themselves pregnant without the need to know who the father is. It's quite common with lesbians. They use a turkey baster. Lesbians? Well, they can't have children naturally, can they? So they use a turkey baster filled with some chap's spunk, stick it up the floozy and inject it. I thought you were a man of the world, Gary. I sat back in my chair. For fuck's sake, Harriet, Lisa hasn't been going to a sperm bank. As far as I'm aware, she isn't a lesbian. Harriet looked confused. Oh, so how's she trying to get pregnant without you knowing? She must be having it off with someone. Yeah, me, I said, rolling my eyes. So, are you asleep when she's having it off with you? Asleep? I drank the rest of my coffee, wishing it had a large helping of brandy in it. No, of course I'm not asleep. She came off the pill and hoped she'd get pregnant, but she didn't bother to tell me she'd come off the pill because she knew I didn't want another kid. Ah, I see now. Finally. Then again, it would have been a bit more exciting if she had been a lesbian, I laughed, knowing it was all far from funny, but having a few images of a rather horny threesome. I think I could be a lesbian. Harriet's announcement took me by surprise. I mean, I love hard cock, who doesn't? But I do find women attractive too. At my age, it's not easy to attract the opposite sex. I've been on a dating website for 2 years, and the only winks I've had have been from old blokes with more baggage than a Ryanair flight. I want some young stuff, someone to show me a good time. I'm not interested in all that romance and flowers. I want sex and lots of it. Yeah, me too, I thought. I nodded. Can't fault you there. I'm 53, Gary, not getting any younger. But in here, she thumped her chest, and I'm sure another button popped open as the cleavage seemed to spring out at me. I'm still in my 20s, young and up for it, like you in many ways. I was 31 and definitely still up for it. Harriet might have been more than 20 years older than me, but I was beginning to realise that she definitely still had it. I don't think I want to join a dating site, but I've decided I'm not staying with Lisa. It was obvious that Harriet, being nosy and wanting me to confide in her about my problems, had turned into her telling me she was still on a mission to prove her youthfulness. As I sat opposite her in my office, where she'd no doubt been taken over the desk numerous times by Joe Mint, I realised that my bachelor days could potentially be revisited, and I might get a chance to see what all the fuss was about, not to mention that cleavage. I shuffled a few papers on the desk and tried to pull myself together. Thinking about Harriet in a sexual way was so wrong. The woman worked in the admin office, for heaven's sake, and she typed my letters. It was a well-known fact that she'd given several of the male members of staff the green light, but I'd never wanted to be one of them. Everyone knew Lisa, and if our marriage did end, it would be pretty awkward for me if I started shagging Harriet. But that cleavage was tempting. For a woman in her 50s, she was obviously keeping herself in shape. You should never need to join a dating site, Gary. I reckon you could just click your fingers and they'd come running. She looked at me, running a tongue around her top lip. I know I would. Fuck a duck, she was coming on to me. She was well up for it. I could feel a twinge in my trousers and that all too familiar sense of deja vu going back to the time when I used to get turned on at the thought of Lisa coming on to me in my office and us having sneaky oral sex against the door. Jesus, I thought, this officer's seen some action over the years. My mind did a whiz back through time when I'd had a brief fling with Deborah Carnival from the local leisure centre. A woman who was definitely in her 50s when I shagged her then. Harriet had a lot more lumps and bumps than Deborah, and definitely sported that muffin top that Lisa kept going on about. But that chest needed exploring, and I was starting to come around to the idea that I might be the man for the job. Suffice to say, Harriet left my office when lunch break finished, leaving me with a hard-on and the thoughts of taking her to Doggers Beach to give her a good scene to. Alfie would have a field day when I told him this.